All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the Family Movie Time Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff M. Giordano. I'm really excited today to have Summer Shelton with me as my guest. We're going to talk about My Girl. And if you've tuned into the previous episodes, I did an episode about E.T. with my sister recently, and got a lot of good films coming up. So today we're going to talk about My Girl from 1991, and I'll let you introduce yourself. Summer, you got the mic.
All right. Hello. Thank you for having me. As Jeff said, my name is Summer Shelton, and I'm calling in from the beautiful state of North Carolina, which is where I was born and raised, and moved back to not too long ago after spending several years in New York working in independent film. I kind of built my career through the ranks of production, going from like coordinating, managing, line producing, and then started producing. And most recently, kind of took the plunge and wrote and directed, edited, starred in a feature. So I'm in a interesting position where I'm being brave and trying some new things that I've always wanted to do and maybe not had the opportunity to do. And by working so much behind the scenes, finally learned how to do things maybe in front of the camera. So it's been a very taxing last couple of years, kind of in the industry as a whole, but it's also been, I've made it fulfilling in different ways. So it's a crazy time in the film world, but I guess by trade, most would know me as an indie producer. And hopefully, not too long, people will also recognize some of the other interests that I have too.
Thank you.
Hmm.
Um, from the epic list that I sent you of movies, it's got like 830 movies.
So many.
You picked My Girl from
Uh-huh.
1991.
Uh-huh.
I'll just ask a general question. I'll let you start. What made you pick My Girl?
I mean, when I think of anything about like my youth and movie watching, this film is always in my vernacular. I think, I didn't grow up with a lot of entertainment, like in terms of television. We had five stations, no cable, no, the big dish outside in the yard that some people had, none of that. So, but I always loved going to the local gas station and renting movies. So a lot of the movies that I would have available to me would be like in the 80s catalog of comedy or family or the Disney animations and things. And I also watching movies and things was something that, and I still do, is something, me and my mom would do a lot in, maybe in the evening if we had a bonding moment or whatever, we would like to watch movies and talk about them together. And, I was fortunate that my parents were somewhat strict in terms of, allowing, I watched things and I wasn't like censored or monitored, but we also had chores and went outside and played more. So we didn't watch a lot. But when we did, they were actually looking back somewhat liberal with like what I was exposed to. But My Girl for me is always just a tender place in my heart because I remember it's a movie that touched me because I remember watching it and I was practically the same age or there close of the characters. And it was probably the first time that like watching something where a young girl is literally talking to you throughout the movie and leads and carries a film. At least it was the first that I had seen. I'm sure maybe there's others, but I mean, to be quite honest with you, let's be honest, there's probably not a large amount. But I remember that. And I always remember the name Veda and just her name was so special and unique. And, she had big, beautiful eyes and just an endearing look. And, when I was younger, I had big eyes and I was somewhat tomboyish. And also, my best friend was a young boy that had extremely blonde hair, like Thomas J. So when I watched this, it was very like it just hit home to me, like in ways of like, oh, this feels interesting to me, but it feels something like could happen and it felt something true and real. It wasn't animation, it wasn't fantastical. It was just embedded in reality. And I honestly think probably from like those kind of 80, early 90s dramas embedded in reality is probably what set my kind of tone of the films and stories I like and I like to tell, and I've just found myself drawn to probably my whole life.
The film has an interesting mix of like comedy and
Mhm.
drama. And certainly we could say there's a lot to be said about mortality experienced by adults and young people.
Mhm.
Um, what does the movie make you think in terms of like mortality or like early experiences that maybe you had with people close to you or around you that passed away?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I kind of come at it at a different angle in terms of I grew up on a farm. And I have a very specific memory as a child. I mean, it is rooted in me that I can't lose this image out of my head because I remember we have a very long driveway and I used to ride my bike, like going, full speed up and down the hill and, one hand, all this stuff. And I remember being on my bike and kind of zooming into the shop where my dad had the big garage open. It was a hot summer day. And I could see that he had, like these galvanized silver tubs laying specifically. But then also, this was slaughtering time of sheep. And I remember very specifically, I don't think my dad knew that I was coming up so quickly or whatever, but like I turned the corner and then I turned my head. And it was the moment where his knife went straight through the middle of a sheep's belly and the guts just fell out into this galvanized bin. And I was probably, I don't know, somewhere between 4 and 6 years old. But it was from the kind of that moment on, it's like it was something as a conversation or a thought process of like, oh, I look to the left, there's all the sheep right in front of me. That sheep is dead. And here's its body laying out in front of me. And probably it could be tomorrow night, we're going to have dinner. But it was just, that was like in terms of mortality and coming to see life and death right in front of your face. And it reminded me too so much of like when Veda's tripping down the halls and her dad's the mortician and she's always around like dead bodies and death and things. And when you live on a farm and you're in that world, you are as well. I mean, you have to be very cognizant of the precious of life, what it means to be alive, but also kind of circle of life, so to speak, in a very different way and in a way where, you use survival in a certain way, but also how death sometimes helps bring life to others. And it's a very kind of odd thing, but I remember that specifically and connecting with that. And I do remember going to, in the South, we go to funeral homes and, everyone walks through, like even the children. It's not like death's kept separate. You walk together as a family, you put on your Sunday best. You go to the funeral home and you stand in a very long line and, you get antsy, but you learn to mind your manners. And there's open caskets, so I had seen dead bodies and, family and different things. So that wasn't too far off of my radar. Um, so death wasn't something that was taboo. It just seemed very a part of life.
When you look at like the period of childhood and like, I guess that transition stage of like between childhood, adolescence, young adulthood,
Mm.
and maybe how the idea or the conception of childhood has evolved over the years. What do you think of, in terms of like the experience of childhood these days, maybe in contemporary times?
Oh my goodness. People always ask you that question, and I think now kind of being in my middle-aged, nearing mid-40s, and you think about like, oh, people say, oh, would you want to go back? I'm like, I'd go back to certain aspects of my childhood, but I would not go back to but I would only go back to it in that specific time period. I would not want to redo it now. I would not want to be an adolescent now. If you gave me, whatever choice of reliving high school and not, I would never choose to do it again, at all. I mean, like Veda, I felt too, kind of sometimes like an odd bird, like I fit in, but I didn't fit in. I didn't really know what my interests were, but I knew it wasn't the same as a lot of people around me. Um, and I wasn't afraid to take risk and I wasn't afraid to be myself, even if it meant I was alone at times, which is still, common. And I felt connected to Veda's world because she was around a lot of adults and she grew up around adults and I did too. I didn't grow up in the neighborhood, across the road was elderly uncles and aunts and my grandma and grandpa and so I grew up with older grandparents too. It wasn't like I had youthful grandparents. I never met my father's parents and my mother's. Looking back, I always remember they were always old. They were just always old in a traditional word. And, my grandpa walked with a cane. But, thinking about it in terms of today, and maybe I'm just, I'm not a parent, so I can't speak as if I was, but I just wonder where the nostalgia is and where the ability to let your mind wander. And I think that wonderment is something that I get concerned is not present. That scares me a lot and also solitude and creativity. I had to make up my friends that I played with. If my dear young friend wasn't, around for us to get together and play, then and I had an older brother, but, I wasn't cool enough to hang around with him and his friends. I was the little, annoying little sister. So, I had my dolls and I had the farm, the animals, and that was my world. And I wonder now that children and people have community to such a strange periphery. They have a community that is virtual. They have communities that they create. And I don't even feel right using the word community because I don't even know sometimes if it's embedded in anything other than not reality. And that concerns me a little bit and how that is about just playing and feeling feelings, not trying to distract yourself from feeling feelings. And I think that's something that I've always done is I feel things very deeply. And even as a child, feeling things and seeing these things happen, I thought about things probably more than I should, and still do probably as an overthinker. But I guess that's what I would be worried about in the change is just being outdoors and present with each other in a very physical way. Like you're literally beside each other, you're playing with each other, you're riding bikes, you're scraping knees. I mean, my dearest friend of life is my dear friend because I remember the first thing that she did was help me clean up my leg when I busted it on a playground. So it's that very human touch and things. And so I think that's kind of what I would worry about in some ways or think twice about is like, what does that world of wonderment and outdoors and also not being afraid to be outdoors and explore. And I think that's where I've developed my resiliency of like, I can handle myself. I can be on my own and I'm not afraid to go outside after dark and, but I know how to do it safely. But I think those are the things that I always wonder about is like, what does that feel like now as a child to always feel like they have an audience or they need to entertain an audience? Whereas I just wanted to act with people. I didn't need to do anything for them. I just created the feeling of them around me.
Were you into poetry or literature as a younger person, like Veda's age, 11, 12 years old?
Oh yeah, I definitely I remember having little journals and writing rudimentary ABAB poems, just like rhyming things. Like, when Veda's first poem, when she went in, roses are red, violets are blue, those type of poetry and things. Um, and two, I grew up, going to church and Bible verses and stories and quite larger than life stories and two with very real consequences, talk about mortality. Like if you want to like have learn mortality as a kid, just go to like Southern church. You don't hide it. So Bible school will tell you real quick about, life and death and all the experiences in between. So, yeah, as a kid, I definitely connected with wanting to find a way to express myself in some type of tangible written way. And also, I just love the feeling of books, and it was very tactile. And I always was very, and I still am to this day. It's probably a silly thing, is I have a stack of books that are, empty. I haven't written on them yet because they're so precious. I'm like, well, I got to have the right thing to start it. And I remember even as a child, like not being one that wanted to like scribble and write and doodle. It had to be very deliberate. Like it was deliberate words on the page.
Since you've lived in different places like the
hmm
South and New York City, maybe
hmm
other places as well, um, what is it about the South that, I mean, you grew up there.
hmm
For anybody who hasn't,
Yeah.
lived there or spent much time there, how would you describe it? Like, how is it different than like the big cities in the US or other places?
What's interesting is, I don't consider myself like a super world traveler, but I've, been out of the country to other countries and things. And I sometimes feel the most akin to the South sometimes when I'm in certain places in Europe, Eastern Europe, even in the outdoors. But I think for me, there's nothing, even working in the Midwest, which is, I would consider like, a cousin of the feeling. But I think in the South, it has a different kind of peacefulness to it that I enjoy. And specifically where I live in North Carolina, I think I lived in New York at the exact time I should have in my life, which was in my mid 20s to mid late 30s. And that was the perfect time for me as a woman to be there. Um, and now I do feel that I prioritize different things that the South can foster me, which is peace, nature, being able to be outdoors. I felt that coming home, so to speak, has made me more present in the moment with family. And especially too, as now as, being in a role as a caregiver and my parents being older, mortality is a regular conversation, both as in dark humor ways, but also in like serious ways. And, so I feel like in the South, that dark humor and that, Southern Gothic feeling is something very real. You're at peace around here, but there is definitely a feeling of like survivalness and strength and hard work. And it looks beautiful and peaceful, but it's not always easy. Like, I don't equate city life being the hard life all the time when, like, I look outside and I see, a neighbor baling hay in the hot sun and, maybe with a water bottle, if they're lucky on a fence post that's they drunk already, an hour ago. So I think those are the things like for me is I feel like when I'm here in the South, I can see life happening rather than sometimes in the city, I see people going to make life happen and trying to get to places or get in restaurants and get to places. Whereas here, you just walk in a restaurant, there are people eating, and they're doing it on their own time. There's definitely Southern time, and most recently, I was in New York last week and was with someone that's not Southern, and I very quickly had to remind them that I'm on the Southern step time right now. Like I don't walk as fast as I used to, and so to like bring it back, So for me, that's what I kind of like about it. And I love riding in my car with the windows down. I like listening to music, and I like being able to have those private moments with myself and not always feel like I'm around an audience.
I got to ask you your opinion of Flannery O'Connor. Is there
Everyone asks me that.
is there a particular book that you think most people should read, or how do you feel about Flannery's work?
Just read them all. Just, just read them all. You can't read enough. I mean, to be honest with you, if anything, I feel most neglected is, not reading enough. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I would just say yes, just read it all. And a lot of people do say like, oh, have you done your genealogy to see if you're kin or anything? And I'm like, I haven't, but in the South, in some way, we're probably all related. So I'm sure there's some branch of my family tree that either I know about or some branch of the family tree we don't talk about anymore that connects one to the other.
with with respect to older relatives and like growing up
Hmm.
around older relatives
Hmm.
and with the film My Girl, there's one of my favorite scenes is when the Dan Aykroyd character, the father of Veda in
Hmm.
the movie, is playing the tuba for his mother.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's a scene where Veda's holding her grandmother's hands, and just kind of like almost meditating with her. Um, to me, to my perspective, maybe it's just my opinion, but it seems like, growing up, living with older relatives in the home,
Hmm.
or growing up and, staying kind of near them
Hmm.
seems to maybe be a thing of the past and not as common these days. Or maybe it's more common in the South. I don't know. Do you have any opinions on that?
Well, I mean, where I grew up, when I say like on my farm and everything, we were here and we had a long driveway and there was some woods, but on the other side of that woods was my grandparents. And like anytime we go down the road, we're going to pass by their house. And then here on the road, like my whole road was littered with like the brothers and sisters of my grandpa. And so it's, I mean, the road I live off of is named after my great uncle. So, and all of them they were old. They had candy in their overalls. They ate, I just remember, if I was walking from grandma's to my house, if I saw, Bob sitting on his porch or Woody, I could walk over there and chances are he had a Werther's original or a piece of peppermint in his bib overalls. And I was like, oh, I'm going to wander over here and talk to Bob and Woody for a minute over on their porch. And sure enough, you get a piece of candy. But I think too, I think that too helped me just be a little more open to talking to people. Like I'm pretty comfortable and even more as late, I'm now interested very much in stories of older generations. Um, I was at my grandmother's probably every day for most of my childhood at some point during the day. And even would spend the night. And I remember, when Veda climbs up in her grandma's lap, even though I would remember doing that and sitting with my grandma on her lap. And I just remember wanting to like just put my skin against hers because hers felt so soft and she had wrinkles. And I remember the way she smelled. And, I always liked to, touch Papa's face. And, it's just, they felt different and they were different people. And I think I kind of maybe hopefully had a respect for them in that way. And um, my father, even though my father, I would describe him as probably like the youngest 80-some-year-old you'll ever meet. But growing up, when I was in class, maybe this is also just some things more common in the South, is most of my classmates' I usually had the oldest parents in the class. My dad was even older than one or two kids' grandparents. So I always had the older parents, even though they were like, you know, my mom had me when she was in her late 20s, and my dad, they're not like 9 years apart. So he was the older. dad, but he looked the same age. So that was always too something of a conversation is like, well, your parents are much older and, so that idea of what it means to be old and, your age is something that people are aware of. But for me, I would just if I saw the old people on the road or at church, they were just people. And most of them were relatives or the people we went to church with. And I didn't feel any different from them. They were more probably my comrades than most people my age because I lived, in a rural area and I didn't live in a suburb. And I too think Veda's life was a little bit of an escape for me. Like, I wish I lived where I could ride my bike to Thomas J's house or, ride my bike to the willow tree or ride my bike to go jump in the lake. But, I could ride my bike to the mailbox or to grandma's, but that's about it. Like after that, you're getting into like miles. So that was kind of too, I thought like Veda was like, seems like an idyllic lifestyle of having that, you know, kind of mobility to get around on her bike everywhere. And she was so cool.
In terms of Veda's exploration, awareness of like, this kind of evolving womanhood with
Mm-hmm.
makeup, lipstick,
Mm-hmm.
um, the film seems to, explore those kind of
Mm-hmm.
elements with a kind of sensitivity and tenderness
Yeah.
that I can't remember many other movies doing it like that in that kind of way. And maybe that's what makes this movie so unique.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think so. I mean, definitely, I think connected to those two because, my mother, even though, she's a Southern lady, she was very stylish and dressed up and, always did her hair and beautiful makeup. And I'd want to play in it. And also, like, she would put me in pageants and things, sometimes to my chagrin. So, there was that whole thing of like getting done up. And, there's definitely, you get done up to go to church or gussied up, that some people would say or whatever. So you go to church or you have pageants, and there is this thing about your presentation and at what place is right. But too, when you come home, it's just like all out the window. But I like the fact that with my girl, the womanhood and her femininity wasn't treated as if it's a weakness. And that I appreciate. It was too just her, it was a part of her development. It was her interest. When Shelley put on her lipstick on her and started talking, she would always ask very mature questions. And they did not treat Veda like a silly child or, but of course, her sashaying out on the porch was very, dramatic and, but when you're a young girl and you put on fancy, I remember walking in my mother's high heels and they were too big for me, or putting on her dresses and, sashaying around, and you just walk different and you feel different. But, I even do that even right now in my 40s. If I get done up a certain way, I probably walk and feel a little different too. So I appreciated that even at that young age, they acknowledge the complexity of a child and a young girl, and that it wasn't a weakness for her to want to be a girl, not just a tomboy. Like, I don't consider necessarily Veda a tomboy by deliberateness. It was just who she was. Like, she had her jeans and she ran around, but throughout the film, you start to see, I really noticed the costumes in that film a lot now. I mean, I didn't at the time, but, now you see the progression of her, more gender neutral clothes to things slightly becoming a little bit more feminine and frilly to then at the end of the film, she's wearing a dress to read her final poem. But never once, even though these things were changing, she didn't change who she was. And she was the same person. And I always resonated and like that because I don't feel like that has to change who you are or makes you stronger or weaker by choosing how you want to what mask you want to put on in the outside world that day, because we all need our masks for different reason at different times, but we still have the same face under them.
When you think about the Jamie Lee Curtis character, Shelley in
Mm-hmm.
My Girl,
Mm-hmm.
did that character remind you of other people, or when you think of the character, does it bring to mind some ideas?
Shelley was a foreign object to me. Like the idea, like she was, single woman out on her own in her RV camper. And two, that was never much. I mean, it was a part of a plot point and plot device with the ex-husband coming and things, but it too, it was addressed like, oh wow, this seems a little different, but it wasn't like she was made out to be a hero or overcoming such big obstacles because she could drive an RV van. That's just what a woman can do and did. It's the same as, 2 weeks ago, I was chainsawing trees down, and here I am today. But she was cool. She was like the city woman to me, and a stranger coming in from out of town, and a single woman of that age. Like I didn't know many single women growing up as an adolescent. I wasn't around many of those. Most of them were, either aunts, uncles, parts of couples, teachers. If I was ever around a single woman, it was my teacher, and I just didn't know who her husband was. I just imagined or conjured up some idea in my head who her partner may be.
There's another film you mentioned I want to give a little time to, The Bridges of Madison County.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, how do you connect with that movie? What could you say about it?
too much. I mean, that film, I remember reading that book to, go back, and I read the book in my adolescence, like teen years, and it probably didn't sit with me as much. Like I read it and remember enjoying it, but I don't think it really like stabbed me in the gut until I was older. And I don't think it really crushed my soul until I rewatched it like during the pandemic. And two, I think it's because I very much am drawn to stories about slice of life, about how small windows with people can make really big impressions in your life. And I too remember, I will never forget how I felt watching Meryl Streep's character in that final frame in that truck pulling away from that gas station. And anytime I think about if I could ever make a movie and make someone feel the way I felt watching that truck pull away and seeing her look out the window and know she's feeling so much, but no one else around her even notices. Like I felt that so much throughout my life and even still do, but like to feel like you have to repress and hide so much feelings just to like, you know, fit the norm or not rock the boat. But that she had this whimsical moment, but also like it wasn't until maybe I got older I started to think about like the complexities of like this was a married woman. I mean, when you like really get brass tacks and think about it and like the weekend that they had together, like that that was against everything I had ever been taught about growing up as a child and, as a proper lady and these things. But then you see a story play out and you're like, this is real life. Like adults have complicated lives. And I think it's when I started to like see films like The Bridges, Madison County, where adults had complicated lives as I was getting older and watching my parents have problems, complications, and started seeing them as people, not just mom and dad, that I think that kind of humanity hit. But with Bridges in Madison County, I think for me, it's, sure, it's got that, handsome stranger coming to town, the photographer, and, I didn't grow up around a lot of men that wanted to be photographers. And, when I went to New York, I met the artsy fartsy guys. I went to film school, but, so I think that to have that Clint Eastwood figure who's that embodiment of, a little bit of, that grit of a, working man, but also with this side and pensive, but also too with Meryl Streep being a character that could be quiet and and again, just be present, and to also be able to have this second chance at a connection, and to be able to let it be what it meant to be, was just that slice. And also too, I mean, it's just very poignant and very painful. And most of the things that I write or create or made or want to make are pretty things that are like rooted in reality and not a happily ever after. I mean, I've never really clung to the happy ever after films. And even My Girl is not happily ever after. I mean, a young girl's best friend died. Like her first kiss, died. Died going to get her ring, her mood ring. He had wanted her to consider him, and that was just like so precious. And like it still just gets me choked up to think about like this love that she had for this young boy. And even like too, and even Bridges of Madison County, like losing a love is a different kind of grief, but it's a grief. And I think that the definition of love can change in so many different stories. It just gets me like, oh, just even thinking about it, I get tore up.
Well, it's like the power of cinema. Like
hmm
when you think about your film career thus
hmm
far,
hmm
what is it that keeps your passion kind of
Yeah.
going, or
Yeah.
what keeps motivating you to
Mhm.
work on movies?
Yeah. Oh, I got to really pull myself up my bootstraps most days, because independent film is really like almost martyring yourself to want to make something, and it's not great. It's not glamorous, but I think what has happened in the last 5 to 7 years is that I do feel like I have found my voice of what I want to talk about. And, I've been able to like retrace back to even like a film like My Girl, which at its core too is also about memories. It's the memories that she did have or didn't have. And in this story, it's like the memories she didn't have with her mother. And with British and Madison County, it's like about creating memories, or knowing that that love will only exist as a memory. And also like Veda's love with Thomas J, he will only be a memory. And so the idea that like love has to be present and real is not really in my reality. And I've never really like experienced love that way. It's been more of like a very specific chapter or slice or moments. And so when I made my first film, it's very much like I'm starting to now see patterns of like traces, like where did this come from? Like what in the world is this like true to life, poignant and painful? It's not happy ever after, but it's not sad. It's just real. Like it's the reality. Like Meryl Streep's not going to go be with Thomas, with Mr. Kincaid. She rode home in that truck. And I bet you before she got out of that truck, she cleaned her eyes off and she went and made dinner. And that's what her day was.
Can you talk about your film? You have a recent film that you
Sure.
directed. Could you,
Yeah.
say more about it?
Yeah. So it's a film called You and I. I made it during the pandemic. I could not have made that film had I not worked on for 15 years on other films in production, because I wouldn't have known how to pull it off at such a shoestring level and so micro budget. And so I made it in a very specific way, character driven, few locations, no exterior night dialogue. I wrote the story so I could film my character storyline in order. So you always, you wrap out a location the same time you're wrapping out the story beat, and you just keep it moving. And it's a story that takes place over, 5 days. And I like stories that do have some type of slice of life moment, whether it is a summertime story, like, or a school time story, and has these almost bookends of things, in bookends of supposedly big moments in your life or something. And this film is about two people that knew each other in their mid to late 20s, early 30s, and had quite a significant whirlwind emotional connection and romance of a very specific sort. And sadly, it did not end well. And so this is years later, my character comes back to town and they happenstancely run into each other. And so I pretty much was inspired by, I don't know if this film's on your list, but a film, Splendor in the Grass. So I pretty much said to myself, well, what would happen if Bud and Deanie reunited for a weekend 10 years later, when they were more mature, when they were adults, when they were sexually mature, when they had been through things in life that was on their own? Like, what would that conversation look like, where they could like dissect what went wrong and how could they maybe redefine their love story? And pretty much my film's about two people that use this opportunity to redefine their story, but also create the memory that they never got to have together. And then I don't want to spoil the ending, but then it ends in a very real, true to life way of like, sometimes people are your chapters, not your stories.
Do you think, is there a chance it'll play around the country? What does that look like right now?
I'm hoping so. I am on the cusp of figuring out what that would be, but I do plan and hope that it will be in the fall of this year, be out in the world, hopefully in some theaters and definitely in your homes. Although I encourage you to get out and go see it, but it's also I've screened it at some festivals at this point. I had the honor of premiering it at Nashville and then playing New Orleans and the American Film Festival in Wrocław, Poland, which was absolutely wonderful. And then just recently at River Run here in North Carolina. And I've really loved being able to talk to the audiences afterwards. And it is about, and having the audience members tell me about their Sarah or their Joseph, that's the characters' names, and who in their life was kind of the one that got away, is kind of what this story is about. And I think that goes back to all stages of our life, that we go through that. Like, even if you're Beta's age and you have a childhood friend, you always wonder, like, what happened to that person, or where are they now? And even through your teens. And then I'm sure that, we're all probably guilty of a ex-boyfriend, girlfriend Google every once in a while to just do a little, recon. But yeah, I think it's always too about not being afraid to look back, but more importantly, being brave to move forward in your life. My sister and I say things like windshield, not rear view, Summer. Windshield, not rear view.
Do you have ideas that could be considered family friendly, like scripts or stories for movies of your own?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I'm actually I have been for many, many years, and I'm just going to start manifesting it to finish. I've been working on a children's book. But it's a children's book that adults will enjoy also. They will take away something from it reading to their children, and but children will enjoy it on their own level, kind of like how you feel reading some Shel Silverstein books, where you can read it and just enjoy it, but then you start to think about it, and like the missing piece meets the big O is probably like an existential crisis when I reread it. And like in grad school or something, you reread something, you're like, oh my gosh, like, wait a minute, where's my missing piece? So I hope that this children's story, I'm sure anything I write or create will probably be somewhat a little bit melancholy, poignant, painful, but hopefully just a peaceful smile of contentment.
There's a book, children's novel by Doris Buchanan Smith called A Taste of Blackberries from 1973. Have you heard of this book?
No, I have not, but definitely I will
So,
probably go on eBay right after this call and order it.
so basically, when I was doing research about about My Girl, the film, it mentioned that this book's plot is similar,
Oh.
and it deals with the differences in the ways children and adults respond to mortality. There is a
Mm.
character that has an allergy to bee stings,
Oh.
and it takes place in the suburb of Washington, D.C., the author's birthplace,
Huh.
Doris Buchanan Smith.
And it's from the 70s?
73 is when it was released.
Huh.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting to read.
Yeah, I just discovered it from doing the research. I'd never heard of it.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely have to read that.
And
It's funny how like you find when you watch movies or you're creating things and you start to read materials. I feel like books and poems and movies find you when they need to find you. And I remember being in the edit of You and I and um reading Edith Wharton's Summer. And I've had that book laying around, obviously, just because it's titled Summer. I probably got it at like some book fair. I was like, oh my gosh, it's got my name on it. And, I just finally read it during the edit of You and I. But then I started reading it, and it was just like so strange that this book is about this young girl who a guy comes through town that's an architect. And in my film, You and I, the character I wrote for my co-star is an architect. And, like it's just all these like weird things. And like also they have a slice of life romance together and things. And I'm like, it's almost like you feel like you're in some type of matrix of emotion at times when you're creating things. It's like, what is happening in my life?
another movie that the film My Girl reminded me of, and it's based on a book that I remember reading as a kid, Bridge to Terabithia.
Oh, yes, that's a must. That is a must. I remember reading that in grade school. That was just like I think that that's a book I read probably around the same time I found that film I was talking about, or Man in the Moon with Reese Witherspoon, which also all these films that I speak to have someone dying in them, which was one of the rules that I made for myself when making You and I is that no one would die. So I want to make a Southern movie where no one dies on a tractor, no one brings a casserole anywhere, no one's pregnant. Like there, there's a lot of Southern tropes you see in movies, and some of them rightfully so. I'm not gonna lie, I went to a casserole dinner celebration like probably a week ago, but I didn't want to have any of those things, but they exist. And I remember Man in the Moon finding a few years after My Girl, it's more like my preteen years, when I started to really like think about like, oh, there's different between my friend and that boy that I look at and think about a little bit differently, when you start to feel the presence of, boys around you and wanting to have a boyfriend and wanting to have your first kiss and those things. And Man in the Moon, that character got to live through these things. And these are all like strong, rural girls that are going through life in a mature way, and they're not trivialized for it or punished. And they make mistakes and they don't always do the right things. And I appreciated that too, like about My Girl, Veda. Opening scene, she breaks the rules. It tells her right there, no bikes in the alley, and boom, she's right past it. So, but she also takes accountability. She told Shelley about stealing the money, and so these are things that I guess maybe I'm drawn to is these female characters that are a bit more complicated and have to deal with very real emotion. So I'm hopeful that maybe I can continue to make that, whether it's a family friendly film or more adult oriented, that the people always feel genuine and real and complex.
For some reason, I thought of when you were talking, there's a movie by Coppola, Francis Ford Coppola, The Rain People. Have you
I haven't
seen
seen
this
it.
one? It's a really
Mm-mm.
interesting, like, drama, slice of life. It's got like romantic situations. It's an art house movie that he made. I want to say in the 70s, early 80s. It's an
Hmm.
interesting film. Yeah, you might get some inspiration or you might
Yeah.
enjoy it maybe, overall.
It sounds like it's up my alley. I'm now trying to like I feel like I got a lot of inspiration in my youth watching, these like My Girl teen like these type of teen girl movies where they're more adult movies with leading teens, not teen girl high school, cheerleader after the boy thing. Not that there's not a place for those. I was a cheerleader and have totally watched many of those movies many a time. But now I am looking at that next generation of elderly and their stories and what's the stories like from the next generation and, like a slice of life film that kind of like like the neck Bridges in Madison County, like 45 years with Charlotte Rampling that was out not too long ago. That was a huge inspiration for me in the edit of You and I, because I didn't watch it until the edit. Because there were certain movies I wanted to watch, but I'm like, no, I can't watch this. I don't want to like mess up myself or whatever. And then I watched it in the edit, and man, those are the things that like rip you apart as like relationships and longevity and learning how to change with someone throughout life, and watch people change and be willing to accept when big news gets dropped at very weird times, which, kind of happens. So,
Has just thinking about female directors,
mhm.
have either Chantal Ackerman,
Mm.
Agnes Varda, or Claire Denis, have they been in your cinema orbit at all over the years?
They have been in my cinema orbit and been in my vocabulary. Um, it's funny that I'm finding now that as I share what I've done with people, they're starting to point out to me things that they feel like is the same language of me. And I'm, kind of like, oh, interesting, or I haven't really thought about that. And all of those definitely are in my vocabulary. You know, um, there's so many great female directors. I do remember having a very big response to watching Fish Tank by Andrea Arnold. Because I feel like that was probably because I don't feel like I really discovered cinema until I was older. Like I said, I had my gas station selection of like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Kramer versus Kramer, anything in a VHS that you can remember of note. That was my world. Um, but world cinema and opening to that, I was probably more like graduate school and had access to it, free library card, which I'm always a fan of. Everyone should have a library card, to be able to go and do that. And that's to finding Fish Tank and watching that and like the piano, Jane Champion. I do remember watching that laying in my living room floor with my mom and thinking, this is different. This is different. These things feel different. Um, yeah, I mean, to be even thought of in the same sentence as any of those people would be quite an honor.
I'll also mention the director Celine Sciamma, who did Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
Yes, absolutely. That was definitely a big one. Two in my kind of like my films I watched during the edit of You and I. That was one of them. Was Portrait of a Lady on Fire and Andrew Hogg's 45 Years and Weekend. Those were definitely in my world of I don't want to say forbidden romance. I just say maybe unexpected romance because I don't want to think that love is forbidden in certain ways, but I do think sometimes it's unexpected, it's unplanned, it may not be conventional, and it may not live in that traditional space, but it may have a purpose in life. And I love all of those kind of works that explore that in a very specific way. And I mean, who wouldn't love a film that ended with that fire scene at the bonfire? I mean, that's pretty like, that's badass. I mean, really and truly, like it's badass.
Also, I'll mention Julie Dash, Daughters of the Dust,
Hmm.
and even some work from Ava DuVernay.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And my favorites recently, like Mariella Heller. I love her work. Diary of a Teenage Girl. I remember being at the premiere of that in Sundance, and then afterwards watching her do the Q&A, and I'm like, this woman's amazing. But like, we're not so far apart in like age and ability. And I think that's like something that I feel like I'm starting to really learn, and I hope other people do, how important that is to like see people doing things like yourself, and why visibility and opportunity and inclusion is so important. Because me seeing Veda on screen as a child, I mean, when you watch it now, like I watched it, and like the opening scene, like I haven't seen that since most recently Fleabag. I mean, she breaks the fourth wall, she addresses the camera, and it's interesting that that's the only time she does it, and those rest of it she's in voiceovers. And so she has that fourth wall with you, she breaks the fourth wall, and then it's in voiceovers. And it's interesting to kind of see that happening, and when you see someone doing something that makes you feel like you're able to do it. And I'm not going to lie, I hadn't worked with a lot of female directors in my career, until I was blessed to work with a lovely director, Sarah Colangelo. Beautiful film, Little Accidents. And some other female producers started, inspiring me, and then finding Mari's work, and Alma Harral, and of course Greta Gerwig, and Chloe Zhao, like all of these female filmmakers of now, Christina Cho, who made the film Nancy. Like these are all just very singular vision films. But when I got kind of a bravery to make You and I, even though these films and filmmakers I wouldn't necessarily compare what I do to, it was knowing that they did it gave me the tenacity to do it. And I remember watching Katie Azelton in The Freebie that she was in, she wrote it, she directed it. And then knew of Lena Dunham's early film, Tiny Furniture. She wrote it, she was she was in it, and even seeing Girls on HBO and things. Like, you don't have to be just one thing. And I think that that was the biggest thing for me in my career, was deciding that I didn't have to be just one thing. And I think that's a big thing for a woman in many aspects of her life. And I've definitely had that come to Jesus moment in personal and professional in a lot of ways. But I think in terms of filmmaking, and even looking at the way women are in films, they're not just one thing. Um, so that's my soapbox.
Is there anything else from your notes related to My Girl, or
I'm trying to
anything else
think.
you wanted to say?
Oh man, it's such a, well, I think it would be pretty much a remiss if we didn't give a shout out to like Griffin Dunn.
And
I
Macaulay
mean,
Culkin?
and Macaulay Culkin. And oh man, oh no, what is, I made a
Dan
point.
Aykroyd?
No, Dan Aykroyd's brother, of course, Dan Aykroyd. He's like beautiful, but his brother, Mes, oh, oh, it's on the tip of my tongue. Wonderful man. It's been so much, but I appreciated so much that moment she had with him on the porch outside, where he gave her, while very brief, his backstory of going to war and fighting in Korea, and saying that he had the steel plate in his head, and that he was never quite the same, and not being afraid to have those real conversations between a child and a grown man, and to be able to see that. Um, I definitely like that a lot. And when I rewatched My Girl this time, I cannot say, like, the use of color in that film, blue, Red, tracking it from her first all denim outfit to Shelley's, seeing her in the same frame in an all denim outfit and Shelley in that blue velvet go-go girl dress. And then to trace that to when like Break Your Heart, Thomas J's little blue necktie in the casket. And it was interesting to me to see that change and start to notice that. And even Red, with her lipstick and also the bicycles that they have and seeing where that comes into play. But like, I think the chef's kiss was, she got her mood ring back and it was blue when she got it back from Thomas J's mother and things. And it's just little things like that. But then too, in her beautiful yellow dress and when she's standing and giving her poem, which is so beautiful and so handsome Griffin Dunn. Like talk about like heartthrob of the movie, like, the cool teacher, the artsy teacher, the handsome guy seen painting his house. But I loved how all the adults in his classroom respected Veda. And that what it can say if we could start putting our children and adults' environments together at times rather than constantly trying to always separate them, what that could look like and what we could learn from each other rather than, I think any child hates to hear, well, you just don't know yet, or you'll learn, or you'll see, or you're too young to da 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 da. So I still get a little frustrated when my dad says, well, if you only could understand, or you'll never know. But I'm like, I know a lot now, but yeah, I think for my girl, I hope people still find it. I hope they watch it. I think it's evergreen, and I hope it's evergreen. It would be very sad to me the day that a film like My Girl isn't relevant. That would really break my heart. And above all, like, pipe dream, can I work with Anna Klumsky one day, please? Like, to see her as a child and then to watch Veep and everything. And I'm like, still every project that I do, at some point I'm like making lists for directors and I'm like, Anna Klumsky, I'm like, let's have her in a movie. She's amazing. Such a, wonderful actress and all. And to see like, again, to see her doing it now and, at this age and stuff, and that there's chances. So I think if anything, I walk away hopefully, and I'm sure I've rambled way too much, but if anything, I hope people hear me today and acknowledge like how impactful it can be to see someone on screen like yourself and how that really can go a long way and how we should keep kind of pushing all those stories forward.
Well said. No, you were fine talking. I think the actor you were thinking of earlier, the brother
Yeah.
Richard Masur is the actor.
Yes.
He
Yes.
played as Phil, the brother of
Yes.
Dan
The
Aykroyd's
brother.
character.
I love him, his voice. He's very like I know he's been in other films where he played not so nice men, but this role like was like okay, love it. And I love seeing and roles like Dan Aykroyd like being the leading man, like he's there's a you know je ne sais quoi-ness to certain type of men and women and adults that I don't think get respected on screen enough. And I thought he was very charming and handsome and and still do, both he and Griffin. I did have the pleasure of being on a film with Griffin, who is one of an extremely kind and nice, delightful, talented man. Talk about a canon of work, like whew, wonderful. So yeah, it's an evergreen film. It stood the test of time, and so is the talent.
Well, thanks for your time today. It was fun to talk
Yes,
about
thank you.
these movies and your
So
own
good.
film
And
career.
thank you for doing this and bringing such light to family movies. And I loved it. Like it was so special to me the nights that I could get all of my family in one room and watch a movie, or even still to this day, like my mom and I watch movies together. And and even award season, I'll send her, screeners or certain things, and she'll send me like mom's movie reviews, which are really fun to like hear your mom start to watch indie films and be like, oh, just too slow. So it's fun, but it is like it is movies are can definitely bring people together in so many ways. And I think that's another reason why we need to try to get into the cinema a little bit more to be brought together, even if it's in a dark room. At least we're not alone.
And I would say My Girl was a perfect choice because it's the summertime now, and
The
the movie takes place
summertime.
over the summer.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I was on the farm yesterday when I rewatched it, and then too, as I was riding out, I thought, shit, I should get my bike and dust it off and take it back to to my home with me. And I was like, my bike's still in the shop. I should get it out and do that. And I need to cut off my jeans and make some jean shorts. I was like, these are things like it's just so cute. And Macaulay's glasses, like Thomas J not having his glasses on will just forever kill me. Like oh man, like for her to want him to be him at
Yeah.
all times, that she loved him, even like he was the outcast and she loved him for what he was. And that's just like, if anything, that's what I would love for people to take away from My Girl is love who you want to love and how they are for who they are. And you can never find that more so than in childhood friendship.
Well said. That's a good note to end on.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for your time again. It was fun.
Yeah.
I'll I'll stop the recording now.